Good morning, party people, and welcome to Office Hours, the show where I go through your questions that you posted at the URL dancing on the screen right below me. Anybody can upvote questions, so you can decide which questions we cover, and then that's how I go through and choose what wonderful answers I'm going to give y'all. Now, I have to warn you that we don't currently have any kind of like anti-hacking stuff built into there. So if someone repeatedly upvotes their own question, like if they start new incognito browser windows, we can end up with a situation like the top voted question we have here at the moment. Tanchenglai asks, "Hi Brent, we bought your level 2 bundle. We went into frequent thread pool issues. What should we do?" Tanchenglai, you've asked that question already. I've answered it in a previous video. You can't just buy my training. You have to watch it, you moron. You have to actually go into the modules. There's a module that frickin' says thread pool in the title. No, the fact that you paid me money doesn't mean that I'm going to go easy on you. Buckle up, be a grown-up, and watch the training. That's how training works. You moron. Now back to a more normal person. Kulstad asks, "I've been given the glorious task of upgrading a production SQL Server from 2005 to 2019. Can you recommend any tips, tricks, or gotchas?" Yes, don't do it. Just because someone gives you a task doesn't mean you have to do it. And it sounds crazy because most of us in here are full-time employees and someone else is paying our job. And so what I'll do to a manager who asks me to do something like that, because it happens as a consultant too as well, what I'll do is I'll say, "Oh, you know, I don't know how to do that. I can learn, but I'm going to be learning this for the first time because I've never done it before and it's not supported and there's no resources out there on how to do it. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to take a backup of the server, and I'm going to need to do this repeatedly a bunch of times in a row because I'm going to be making mistakes all the way." Or maybe we should just do what I recommend as an export, or as an expert. The reason that you hired me for is to export the data, do like log shipping over to another SQL server, and then we can repeatedly test it over there. And then I won't have to completely rebuild the wheel every time I'm trying to do these upgrades in place. So I've actually done that many times with managers who've said, "No, we're hiring you to do X." And I'm like, "I don't know how to do that. I'm sorry. You're a Microsoft 4 certified master. You're supposed to know." Well, if you hired me to do this task, man, we both made a mistake, and I'd be glad to walk away from the project. But that's kind of an awkward discussion to have as a full-time employee. What you instead have to confess is you have to say, "I don't know how to do this. There's no documentation out on how to do it, and I'm going to make mistakes repeatedly along the way." Good morning, DK Kimbo and Alpha Cronus. Thanks for dropping in. Chandwich asks, "What's the most number of indexes that you've ever seen on a table?" Well, I've done like demo queries in order to put 1,000 indexes on a table, but out in the real world, 174, and I'll always remember that number. And I talk about that story in my mastering index tuning class. Hola, Shane. Chandwich says, "Was it too many?" Yes. He says, "What kind of hardware requirements would be necessary to ensure that all tables indexes are all usable?" It's not just about hardware, because it can also be about your workloads. What if you don't care about the speed of inserts, updates, and deletes? And it sounds like it's a crazy rhetorical question, but it's true. There are plenty of environments where they don't care about the speed of inserts, updates, and deletes, and all they care about is the speed of reports. Plus, the speed of inserts, updates, and deletes aren't that bad, or they're not concurrent. Like they're done in a batch process and overnight that locks tables. There are plenty of instances where you can go higher on indexes. I don't mean higher than 174, but higher than you might be comfortable with without making any changes to hardware whatsoever. Because after all, are your users complaining today about the speed of inserts, updates, and deletes? Probably not. They're probably complaining about the query cost on reports, which takes forever. DK Kimbo says, "If I don't care about inserts, updates, and deletes, let's go column store." And it sounds like he's joking, but that's actually true. That's actually completely true. Next up, Microsoft Excel asks, hi Brent, we recently got a request to migrate on-premises databases up to Amazon RDS. Database is about 300 gigabytes in size. How would you do it with minimal downtime? Log shipping. I'm a huge fan of log shipping. If you're worried about the latency or delay that it takes to do transaction log restores up from on-premises up to Amazon, what you do is do baby steps and put an Amazon EC2 VM together as like a stepping stone. Do log shipping up to an EC2 VM, and because you're probably more used to working with VMs. Then fail over to that EC2 VM, make sure that everybody's happy with latency performance, because sometimes I've had cases where people wanted to keep their apps in different places for a while, and as soon as they have their app servers on premises and the database up in the cloud, they're like, oh my God, the latency is terrible. And I'm like, okay, well, let's fail back. Failing back is relatively straightforward with log shipping as well, as long as you go through and do it right. So that's the approach I would prefer. Maxim says, is it possible to get CDC or database table changes on some other server instance? I have no idea. I don't have anything against CDC whatsoever. I don't have anything against it whatsoever. I just don't use it. I'm sure I've had to troubleshoot it with clients in terms of performance, but I just couldn't tell you how it works with availability groups, how it works with replication, or anything like that. I don't know if you can use CDC on an availability group secondary or on a replication secondary, but that's the place where I would start to look. Next up, Xavier asks, hi Brent, what in your opinion is a good average query execution time for reports or app performance in small to mid-sized databases? Whatever the users are willing to accept. It sounds goofy, but it's really easy as a consultant because I cost money per day. You could think of it as per hour, but I bill per day minimums. So I'll be like, okay, how long do you want me to keep working? And we hit a point where the customer will say, okay, no, things are good enough. We're fine. We'll stop here. Because they know at the end of every day, there's going to be a cha-ching. In order to get me for another day, they can decide whether performance is good or not. It all depends on users' expectations. Some companies like to say performance is a feature. It was a phrase that came out a lot when Stack Overflow was growing up. Apps or websites used to say performance is a feature because if we have this feature, you'll be more likely to use our product. And in environments like that, I mean, like the way that I got started with Stack Overflow, I think Jeff Atwood told me this query this query is running in 50 milliseconds. It needs to run in 20 milliseconds or something like that. Next up, Xavier asks another question. Hi, Brent. I have 4 years of experience with SQL Server. How easy or hard is it to transition to a job that uses DB2? Xavier, do you think I use DB2? Have you ever seen anything about me in combination with DB2? How the Sam hell am I supposed to know the answer to that question? Now, I would say I don't think that the DB2 job market is growing. If I wanted to bet my future career on a database, it wouldn't be DB2. It would probably be Postgres. It would definitely be Postgres. Jessica says, hey, Brent, have some of that Bezos' money with my Prime sub. Woohoo! Thank you, Jessica. Appreciate it. Shane says, wouldn't a concrete answer like that be sometimes 50 to 20 milliseconds is a lot better than as fast as you can? In Jeff's case, he measured page delivery time. He said, we want our web pages to finish rendering in less than, I think it was like 120 milliseconds. And because of this query taking 50 milliseconds, it's pushing us over that limit. So I'm allowed to budget 20 milliseconds for page or for query performance in that. So I was like, that was most companies don't go anywhere near that level of detail, but there you go. Clippy asks, what are your thoughts on Copilot integration with Office 365 for $30 per user? Okay, first off, I have to say I'm totally unqualified to answer this question, but it's not going to stop me from answering. Unlike the DB2 question, it's not going to stop me from answering, but here's the thing. GPT-based products cost money. They cost serious money to put on. Microsoft needs an army of graphics cards sucking up power all the time in order to deliver features like that. This is very different than what people are used to for a lot of the O365 products that frankly don't cost much computationally. They cost in terms of storage or memory or network delivery, but chat GPT type stuff, that costs a lot of money in order to host. So I didn't think it was unreasonable when they said $30 per user. I know that a lot of the people out there were like, oh my God, that's more than like all kinds of other things cost. Yeah, that's true, but all kinds of those other things don't require an army of graphics cards in order to run. If you want to get a feel for how expensive that stuff is to host, go look at the hardware that it requires in order to host something like ChatGPT yourself. I looked at it briefly when Facebook had an open source model come out. I want to say it was called Llama. They had one come out, and they're like, well, you can run it on a MacBook with Apple Silicon processes, but it took minutes in order to get a question response. And I was like, ooh. And same thing if you run it on like an RTX 4090, it takes tens of seconds to get a good response out of it, and the quality's still nowhere near as good as Office Copilot or GitHub Copilot. So I was like, okay, that kind of works. Frag King says, imagine the savings of the people that you can fire because of efficiency gains for companies. I do think that in the long term, chat GPT type stuff will make people more productive at bullshit jobs. I don't swear very often, but there's really only one word to describe that kind of job. If you're a project manager and you get paid to deliver long, flowery reports that no one actually reads, you're going to love ChatGPT integration with Microsoft Office products. I can imagine government contractors. DK Kimbo says, I love AI for writing my help documentation. Exactly, because no one reads your help documentation either. So the longer it looks, the more impressed people are, and at the same time, the less likely they are to read it. They'll just come to ask you for help anyway. But it is interesting. Frag King says project managers and product managers generate presentations, and then consumers summarize the presentations using AI, and Microsoft makes money coming and going. So I totally think it's going to be great for BS type jobs like that. For the rest of us, I don't know that it's going to be that powerful anytime soon. If they gave me for $30 a month something where I could feed in a query and it would tell me, here's in plain English what this is trying to do in a concise way, and here are the risks for bugs inside this stored procedure, $30 a month would be a steal. I'd probably pay $300 a month for that. That would be phenomenal. So I like where it's going. I don't have a problem with $30 a month. Alex asks an off-topic question. Alex says, considering that you visit some nice high-end restaurants, do you have an interest in cooking at home? No, I got my start in hotels and restaurants. My parents had a seafood restaurant when I was in high school. And so I was around cooks then, and I saw how much work it was. I worked the line in restaurants later, ended up managing restaurants and doing a terrible job, like practically you talk about imposter syndrome, totally imposter syndrome. And so I have tons of respect for how hard it is to work the line at restaurants and cook things. As a result, I haven't cooked anything in 25 years probably. I don't think I've cooked anything in 25 years. I've like made a couple stabs and then immediately bailed out, other than like making steak in an air fryer. Steak and salmon in an air fryer is really easy, so I don't mind it. But I don't cook at all at home. I have no interest in it. Frag King says, like anything, nope, nothing. If it comes out of the microwave, I'll do it, like Campbell's soup I used to do. I don't do anymore now. But no, my partners have, like Erica, when I was married to Erica for 20 plus years, or with Erica for 20 plus years, she loved cooking, so she cooked the whole entire time. And now Eve adores cooking, and so Eve cooks all the time. And if it's not one of those two, I go to a restaurant. Restaurants and cars are like my guilty pleasures there. This morning for breakfast, I went to McDonald's, which I don't usually do because it's not good for you. Excuse me. Usually I do Huel for breakfast. I'm a big fan of Huel. But normally I'm out at either Huel or doing coffee shops. DK Kimbo says, what's your favorite dish that Eve makes? Hot pot. Eve does hot pot, and it's, if you haven't had hot pot before, you can Google for hot pot, which sounds like it's going to be gross, but it's fantastic. Shane says the pros and cons of cooking food. Pros, food. Cons, cooking. And I will add too, I don't mind doing cleanup. Like I do, I've always done I do the dishes, I organize around the house. I don't mind cleaning at all because I find it very therapeutic. Whereas cooking and results really matter. Cleaning, you're just shoving stuff into a dishwasher or spraying things down or Windexing or whatever. It's a pretty easy end product. But food, oh man, no, absolutely not. SelectStar says a query that joins two tables intermittently fails with an error converting varchar to int. It gets fixed after dropping and re-adding an index from one of the two tables. I don't think you understand what the problem is. I don't think that you understand what the problem is because I don't think that the index has anything to do with it. He says, when it fails, it has a different execution plan. Okay, what you need to look at is my class, Fundamentals of Parameter Sniffing. Fundamentals of Parameter Sniffing. And then after you've completed that, that may give you enough to get closer to what the root cause is. If it doesn't, you'll want to step up to Mastering Parameter Sniffing. Next up, Balraj asks, is high batch requests a second ever a concern on its own, or does it have to be simultaneously high with another wait stat to be of concern? Yes, absolutely it can be a concern by itself. And I'll tell you a story from a client that I worked with earlier this year. This client was it's an e-commerce company. You've probably heard their name. And they were having a big, busy sale day, and their batch requests a second kept going up. Now, they had a big, beefy server. Queries were not waiting on anything. There were no wait stats whatsoever because leading up to that sale, we had tuned the bejesus out of the server. But I kept watching batch requests a second go up, and I started doing calculations, and I called the team together on the conference call, and I said, look, based on the number of batch requests a second and how it's trending, I think you've got about 30 minutes left before you run out of CPU. That you're going to hit a point within the next 30 minutes where batch requests a second will be high enough that SQL Server CPU scheduling is going to have a problem. And even though we're not at 100%, the number of batch requests a second that we're doing is going to cause problems for SQL Server. And sure enough, it did. It was just one of those wonderful moments when you're right, but then also a terrible moment when you're right, when you're like, all of a sudden the server starts, falling over and smoke's coming out the side because people can't figure out how to shut off transactions or shut off parts of the application fast enough. Next up, Luca says, what is the most efficient way to capture SQL execution timeouts to help troubleshooting? First off, you have to understand that SQL Server almost never times out. There are rare cases where you have like latch timeouts or lock timeouts if you set a lock timeout. But most of the time when people refer to timeouts, it's one of two things. Either someone couldn't connect, the application server timed out trying to connect, or the application decided it was done waiting. The application waited for, say, 30 seconds and called that a timeout. If you want to track that, I think the most efficient way of doing it is query store. Oh, there's an ad break coming. I think the most efficient way to do that is with Query Store, because Query Store actually tracks failed queries, which is completely amazing. So then you can run reports to say how many queries have failed, what did their execution plans look like, and much more. I completely adore. I don't preach Query Store too often, but I think you asked for the most efficient way to do it, and that is absolutely the most efficient way to do it. All right, Twitch is telling me that it's time for an ad break, so I'm going to hop over. Those of you who aren't subscribed to me on Twitch will see an ad. Those of you who are subscribed will talk about our sponsor for this week. Where's the button? There it is. Our sponsor for this week is Drew Fergewell's new class, Fundamentals of Azure Networking. I'm running this class completely for free. You can go over to brentozar.com/go/network, and every day I have a different module set publicly. So as long as you keep up and follow along, you're able to learn the whole entire class at no cost whatsoever, which is kind of amazing. So you can hit that over at brentozar.com/go/network. Frag King says, I don't see an ad yet. That's probably because you're subscribed. I don't know if you subscribed with Amazon Prime, perhaps, or another method over in the past. All right, let's come back over to that. Let's see. Next up, Miles asks, Hi, Brent. We see TempDB sizes growing to 5 terabytes. The version store is 4 terabytes. RCSI is turned on. What does a version store that big mean to you, and how can we reduce the size? By attending my Fundamentals of TempDB class, in which I teach you the different consumers of TempDB and how to reduce their overhead or reduce their usage in TempDB. That is my Fundamentals of TempDB class. I think it's only like $89. It's not too bad. Most of my classes are very much about, you have this problem, here's the solution. Fundamentals of TempDB is really all the things that I wish people knew that TempDB did, all the different consumers of TempDB and what they're good for. So that's kind of fun. Next up, Ben asks, I'm struggling to find the best way to query nested JSON. Me too, Ben. Me too. Ben, we're going to stop the question there. Because as far as I know, there's not a good way to query nested JSON inside SQL Server. I will say that you can use computed columns and you can index those, but that kind of falls apart when your query is really dynamically driven. So, bad news there. Jessica says, when was the last time you discussed hosting for PolGab was back in March of 2022. Have you considered an update to that post to show how much hosting costs have changed month to month versus the usage? I haven't, because it's still just insanely dirt cheap. Every now and then I do a blog post on Constant Care's usage, and I think that's more relevant to the audience because Constant Care has a big monster relational database on the back end. So SQL Server DBAs are often kind of jaw-dropped about how inexpensive that really is, how inexpensive Amazon Aurora Postgres is, especially their serverless version. ChatGPL says, Hi Brent, a friend of mine struggles with tuning many small queries, about 200 procs, called sequentially for 1 million times. Don't call it one at a time. So SQL Server is something called a relational database, and it works very well in sets. If you want high performance, you get sets of data instead of calling for tiny rows one at a time. If you want to tune it, think about batch operations instead of tiny ones. Thank you to Shane. Shane for gifting Frag King a sub. That's very sweet of you. I don't know if we've ever had a gifted sub in here before, so that's kind of cool. He says I'm not wrong now. That's awesome. Augustus says, what spoken language translation tools do you like to use for work and vacation? I am a lazy American. It's so terrible. I'm an awful lazy American. And I don't do spoken language translation. Either somebody speaks my language or else I do written translation. Like I use Google's Translate is amazing. Their Translate app where you can just take pictures of menus and it'll translate live on the fly. It translates anything in writing. It's fantastic. And you can also write out what you want to say in English and it'll flip around and give the written version over in the language of your choice. And so I'd much rather do that and show somebody the phone so that they can read it, because often in a big loud environment, a party, bar, whatever, it's easier to have somebody read rather than try to get your point across verbally when you don't speak the same language. Oh, Sultan asks a tough question. Any recommendations for how to keep logins and SQL agent jobs in sync across AG replicas? No. So Jonathan Cahias had of SQLskills.com had a script for a while that would do that. I want to say he wrote it back in like the database mirroring days. It's probably 10 years old maybe now. If you search for Cahias, Kehyaias, sync logins or sync jobs, you might be able to find it. I haven't seen anything else do that since that's like a script. The way that I would probably approach it now, if I was going to do it in the year 2023, would be to look at DBA Tools. DBAtools.io is a PowerShell framework that has all kinds of capabilities for production DBA tasks, and I bet that that's the easiest way to do it now. I know they have the capabilities to do it. I just don't know if it's going to match exactly what you want, but I'd start there. Dimitris says, do you ever see issues related to SQL connection pooling with your clients? Is it the first thing that I look at? No. Have I seen it in the last 10 years? Maybe twice. And both of the times when I've seen it happen, it's because the application would start sending in queries and then sending more and more queries and having to spin up more and more connections to do it. And it was just because they had set over on the application side something to the effect of send an unlimited number of queries simultaneously to SQL Server. Think concert ticket sales. Like all of a sudden, one web server sends 15,000 queries simultaneously to the SQL Server, and we just don't have enough worker threads in order to handle it. And in the cases that was involved with that, we had to talk about connection pooling, but I had to say, all right, it's not enough that you turn on pooling. I also need you to cap the number of queries that you send simultaneously, or we just got to get a way bigger SQL Server or offload work to readable replicas and so forth. Hi, Ashish. Welcome to the stream. Mike asks, if you query a non-clustered index in a heap, and the data from the column not in the index is required, does the query have to scan the heap table for the row ID? No, it can seek directly to the row ID using something called a RID, a row identifier. And I teach you what that is and how to understand it in my mastering index tuning class. In mastering index tuning, I have a module on heaps where I show you how it works and I show you the drawbacks, both the pros and cons with them. Next up, Doesn't Buy Anything says, hi Brent, a friend is looking for advice. Would you advise an in-place upgrade? Stop there. No, never. Period. End of story. I would never advise an in-place upgrade of anything. And the way that I explain it to clients is, I want to test before we go live. And I can't do that if I'm trying to work on the jet engine while we're in flight. I need to go set up another jet engine so that we can land, take a brief outage while we move the passengers over, and then go take off. But you wouldn't really want to renovate a jet engine while it was in flight, would you? And then people are going, yes, because we don't have a lot of money. That's actually not cheaper. It's much more expensive because I'm going to have to get several jet planes to rehearse that as we go before I actually try it live. Because you sure wouldn't want me trying it live with passengers for the first time, would you? And if they say yes, you're not talking to the stakeholder. You're talking to the checkbook holder. Go find the stakeholder and explain to them the risks that you're worried about, and the stakeholder will get you the budget money that you need to build a separate server first. Benji says, will we ever see a mastering TempDB class? Benji, what I'd turn that around on you and ask is, what do you need to know about TempDB that you didn't learn in the fundamentals of TempDB class? Like, what problem are you trying to solve? And then we'll go from there. SQL Chess says, a friend of mine started a blog but is struggling to find new interesting topics to post. What is your methodology for new blog posts? My methodology is kind of weird because as a consultant and someone who sells software and services, I need to bring people in. So I think about what I'm going to do to bring the right audience to my blog. But for you, here's what I'd recommend. Write up the abstract of the training class that you want to teach 2 years from now. Think about the pre-conference session that you'd like to give or the training class you'd like to sell online 2 years from now. Write the table of contents and then start knocking out those blog posts for every bullet point in the table of contents. I go into much more detail on that if you search for Brent Ozar career, 500 level guide to career hacking or something to that effect. Search for like Brent Ozar hacking your career. And I have like a 2-3 hour video presentation out there on that exact topic. DK Kimbo says, Brent takes the best Paul Gab questions for his blog and answers the other here. In the beginning, I actually did take some of the questions out for the blog. These days, I don't. Jessica says, as primarily a developer, I use my blog as for documentation on problems I run into, and then I can put on my resume. I like the resume kind of thing where you're showing where your career was at, the problems that you faced along the way. It can feel intimidating. It can cause you to feel a little bit like an imposter when you're going, well, I just solved this and let me share what I know. And you may not be confident. But remember, if it was hard for you, it's going to be hard for other people. And they're probably looking for resources just like you did. So that will make your blog popular there. Jessica asks, hey Brent, what sort of tests can I use outside of complicated load replays to test how much overhead a new indexed view would cause? Put it in production and just seems if anyone screams. The way I like to do it is put the indexed view in and then test an insert, an update, and a delete against each of the tables that are involved. Look at their logical reads before and after. Look at their execution plans. Look at their time. Often, even just from one insert, update, or delete, you'll go, oh my God, no, we actually wouldn't be able to do that on a daily basis. Or if you're not sure, after you've gathered those metrics before and after, then go look at the index usage on the clustered index of the underlying tables in the view. Go look at that over in production. And you'll be able to see how many writes a day happen to those indexes. Now you can start thinking about amplifying the changes from whatever you got in your one row example. Amplify that towards, if you're getting 1 million rows a day on the or 1 million writes a day on the underlying tables, that means whatever overhead your indexed view adds, you're going to add that much a day. So that starts to help you gauge whether or not it's going to be safe. All right, well, that's a wrap for today's office hours. So today, what am I doing today? After this, I'm probably going to go stick my head in the backyard. The backyard is getting surprisingly close to complete. We have this big, huge new waterfall that comes down. We have a patio cover and a big waterfall that comes down off of it. So they put that in yesterday. They're finishing up the wiring today. The biggest things left, we have a TV wall. We're putting in like an 85-inch TV outside so that we can see it from the pool, the hot tub, and all that. So we have to mount the TV on the TV wall. There's some stones trim that has to go up. And it looked like today they might be prepping to spray finally the spray deck, like the heat reflective spray deck out there. DK Kimbo says a waterfall in Vegas is a total boss move. We already have one. Now we're going to have two. And it's actually surprisingly not that bad. Not that much evaporates in Vegas, like out of the pool. I can tell you that for sure because I had my pool refill turned off for like a month due to problems with the backyard renovation. And even though we had the waterfall running, I didn't even lose like half an inch worth of water, an inch worth of water out of the pool. So it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. All right, so I think I'm going to go stick over my head in the backyard, see what's going on with that. I won't do a TikTok update until probably tomorrow because I think they're about to finish a whole bunch of stuff today. But I will keep your eyes peeled on my TikTok account for an update with that. It's looking really good. I'm really excited about it. Oh, the fire pit. That's the other thing they have to finish. They have to put the stone top on the fire pit. So I will see y'all later in the next week's office hours. Adios, y'all.